Hi, I'm David Hernandez, and I'm here speaking today with David Cieri. David is not only going to be a TEDx speaker, but he is a master composer. And if you haven't heard of him, hopefully you will soon, or hopefully you'll take the time after listening to us speak today to check out his work. He has done work over the past dozen years that includes documentaries, including work with Ken Burns, one of my personal favorite Ken Burns documentaries, which on the Vietnam War, with which I think you also performed on there with Yo-Yo Ma. Is that correct, David?
Two separate tracks, but yeah, we were both part of the soundtrack.
Part of that sound, that soundtrack. And David has recently done a live performance pre-COVID at the Green Space in New York, which was really something completely unique and different. Basically creating a live soundtrack for Joan of Arc, the silent film Joan of Arc. And we certainly can dig into that in a minute. But I wanted to start our conversation today kind of talking about where it all, where the story all starts, right? And can you just take me back to that moment? I guess you're a child. I think when we first talked, you were maybe 7 years old when you started playing an instrument.
Yeah, I actually was younger. I was about 4 when I had the violin kind of starting to go under the chin and trying to work all of that out. And then about 6 or 7 with the piano.
Right, the piano was 6 or 7. That's right.
Yeah.
And essentially, it was a very traditional approach at that time.
It really was, yeah. My mother was a classical pianist and a harpsichord player, and she was still touring. And she had grown up as a young kid playing with Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra and Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and so I grew up in a house with a ton of classical music and more of the, for lack of a better way to put it, the Western European tradition, at least.
And at some point in your early childhood, though, there is a moment where a sort of a new door swings open. You described it to me, but I'd like you to, maybe if you could share it today with everyone. To me, it's like I call it almost a cinematic moment, the way you described what actually happened. And I think you're very young when this happens.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. Yeah, there's a few moments that I have in music that really feel like, and the way that I like to think about it is kind of my own personal electric chair kind of moments.
Yeah.
There's a couple of those. They continue to happen in my life, of course, in different various ways. But the first one that I remember is lying in bed as a young kid, and it's probably 3:30 in the morning, and I'm listening to the highway that's about half a mile from our home. And I'm hearing all these cars driving on the highway and trucks and potholes and the way that sounds with trucks going over that. And I'm, as a little kid, just the friction of all of that, the sound of all of that, not being able to identify where it's coming from, but kind of knowing what it is. It sent me into a really mythic kind of place where it was my first brush with sound as an entryway into something that could be more powerful and could engage things within me, maybe even more spiritually. It was a very, very terrifying moment, but at the same time, very exhilarating kind of moment. And that sound of rubber on the concrete is a sound, I think it's one of the most beautiful sounds in the whole world. And I have never let it go. I'm still attracted to it. I'm still recording it. I find it a really fascinating kind of moment.
That's interesting. So it's been like a through line.
It's been a through line. It sure has. Yeah.
The interesting, you said highway, and of course, I think also of rhythm.
Uh-huh.
There's a rhythm to the highway, right? There's the thrum of the tires on the road.
It's so true. And so you're making me think of another moment that I haven't thought of in so long, is coming from Philadelphia into New Jersey in the back of the car asleep and listening to the ka-gong, 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 ka-gong of the bridge.
Right.
And that rhythm is another one I'll never, they're embedded in there,
Yeah,
when you're so wide open to the world.
Yeah, right.
It got stuck in there.
That's interesting because you said that has made its way into your music, or at least informed it in some way throughout your career.
Yeah, it has.
I'm curious, are there other elements that I'm trying to find where there's that pivot point that music became something completely different to you? And I don't know if that's as you're getting older. Do you know what I'm saying? Where all of a sudden it sort of breaks open into this area that is connecting internally with you and externally
Yeah.
at the same time. As a creator, you have a process, but that process is not a perfect process ever, because it's always different depending on the subject matter or your mood, or a million things. The research that you're doing and the type of research that it is, all of that can impact that creation, right?
True, for sure. Yes.
Was there, maybe early part of your career where it really started to open up into like, okay, this, I'm sort of removing, I have this picture of you running like Forrest Gump and the brace is coming off, and you just start running and you don't stop running,
Yeah, I appreciate that. So, yeah, that did happen. I think it happened, the Forrest Gump moment for me, it was really more of a slow motion kind of event. But yes, it did happen. I had a moment once at my grandmother's home in Philly. I had an old Walkman headphones on with a foamy ear.
I can feel and hear them right now, and like you did that with your hands. I could picture it.
Yeah, we miss these days, right? Yeah. And I woke up in the morning and it was bright sunlit kind of day, and I put this on, and I remember it was Led Zeppelin. It was Black Dog by Led Zeppelin, and that's another one of these moments a little bit after the realization with the Cars. One of these more electric terror kind of moments where I realized that music could be something so forceful. It's so arrogant, and it's so powerful, even so sexual at that time, and so forthright, so honest, so how a dog walks into the room, very unlike a cat, and they'll just put their nose right into everything, very direct. And that music was like that in a way that it was very unadulterated in that way, and it was a shock. It was really a physical shock. To listen to that, and a way that I've thought about it before is it kind of was a puncturing of the veil. Like there's way more back there than I'm actually kind of seeing. And through Force, by listening to that, I realized this is another thing that music can do.
Right.
That it can be, if it's that good in that case, because I still adore that band. If it's that good in that case, it can show you. Of course, we all know so many things that are just right beyond the things that we take for granted.
Yeah, I mean, you say that, and I agree. I mean, when I think about music on any level, from creating it or just being a listener myself, or there are moments where music not only can transport you, but it can change your perception.
That's right.
It could make you see things in a different way than you had previously.
That's so right. And with Led Zeppelin, if I find that in the city, it's great. I try to encourage my students to walk outside and put on headphones on their same walk home and see how it changes in a way what they're looking at. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a home with parents. My mother was a pianist.
Right.
And my father was an architect, and they were constantly talking about the interthread between the two. And I remember him talking about walking into a room. If it's cold, it looks bigger. If it's warm, it looks smaller when it's actually the same size. And all these ideas, as you're saying with music, listening to something and it looking different, it started to make its way into how I thought about it. I was lucky to have him to have the visual counterpart to her musical.
It's interesting because as we're talking about this, it makes, this is actually, there's sort of a parallel here to your TEDx for next year, which is, the subject is joy. And all of these things that you're talking about, including that moment where you puncture the veil, as you described it, right? And you're kind of seeing more than you realized was there. but it's tied to excitement and joy, both.
Absolutely.
It's many years later, it's decades later, and while that, I think we always have the child inside of us. You're now a successful composer. You have mastery of your craft and of your abilities. But I want to ask you, do you still feel that joy?
Oh, it's only increased. It's only increased. It really has only increased.
Wonderful. So when you think about that joy,
yeah,
is that sort of tied to the creative journey? In other words, in the doing of that piece of music, that soundtrack you're working on, what have you, that project, is it tied to that journey, right? And
yes,
and I got to imagine with you, because of the variety of your work, it's a different journey every time.
That's true. It has to be, and I think for all of us, you have questions that you need answered, and it's so fun to try to figure out how to answer them. And some of the ones that are the most important are ones I'll never answer, maybe with music, but you have them nonetheless, and you go after trying to figure out how some of those big questions might be. I don't know if answered is the right word, but
so we're in the middle of a project.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting on your shoulder. What's going on? What's happening? How do you know you're getting close?
How do I know I'm getting close?
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate your question. I was recently reading about nightingales. And how they apparently practice their songs, and they practice first on themselves before they send them out into the world and try to woo whomever.
Yeah.
And they sort of see, is this working? Am I reflecting back something that is positive with respect to this song that I'm improvising with? And they apparently stick with the ones that they themselves try on first. And I'm not so sure the process is that different. I spent a lot of mornings swimming in the piano, or more recently and more in a humbling way, the cello. I spent a lot of mornings with the sound, and I was trying to stay acutely aware of the moments where what's in here is going to catch some of what's out there, and that it may pass through. As Rilke talked about, standing on the bridge and there was a shooting star and it came down and he watched it come down, but then he said at some point it passed through his inner space. I'm waiting for those moments that might catch what might be reflected in the inner space, and I try to hold on to those. Now I play little games about how I might hold on to those. Uh-huh. I sometimes say I'm going to forget about that, and if I wake up tomorrow and it's there, that means that it really is persistent. And then sometimes I'll record so I don't forget, or so
it's different each time.
It's different each time, yeah. And then also you're trying to find things that you're not ready for, and things that are challenging to you, and things that are you're challenging yourself out of your own listening sometimes too. So it's not a comfortability,
right?
It's more like, how am I built? Let's see, and let's see what sticks and what doesn't, or what passes through and what doesn't.
So there's an element of, it sounds like there's a strong element of a lot of experimentation that's going on.
Yes.
Do you find yourself constantly without a roadmap? I mean, like it's with all due respect to pop music, because it has its own power, but
yeah,
it's not pop music. It's not where you've got a very clear structure.
Right.
That's for the amount of originality and elasticity that pop music does have, and all the subgenres in it, there's still certain conventions that you're working in, right? That makes it a pop song.
Right.
You don't have those restraints, right?
It's a great question. I think some of those might be in there, David. Some of those might be in there that I'm not necessarily aware of because of just growing up and listening to, the Eagles.
So on a sub level, it might be there.
It's in there.
Right.
But you're right on a level that's maybe not so baked in. I'm experimenting in a way that is without, it's off road. I have to be off road with it in order to find not necessarily something new, but something more meaningful.
So I see you and raise you on your off-road metaphor. So now we're off-road. Where are we? There's clearly, if by off-road, there's probably not a map.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think, I have to get lost. I've got to get lost. The phone has to be off. I was recently reading about Twyla Tharp. She can't be in the room with any clocks or any numbers when she's working. I'm not like that. I'm okay with the clocks. But the phone is one thing I have to let go of. I got to, that has to be buried away somewhere. And I have to be able to get lost in a very slow manner and not be thinking about anything else, really.
Okay. So now part of the process is not knowing.
It's a big part of it for me.
Not knowing. So you don't necessarily walk in and go, okay, got it. It's like,
it's very rare.
Very rare. You're walking in, you may have a compass, perhaps like I describe as a fiery lantern, right? To help you through the dark. But that's about it. Because you have your craft. I'm going to use that as a metaphor for your craft, right? You have the compass and the lantern, but you don't really have a roadmap.
There's really not there's not a set structure. There's not a set roadmap. If there were a thing that I knew that I was looking for, and that's where A led to B, and I was going there, I think for me that wouldn't work. I have to arrive and see what's there after the fact. A predestination is going to ruin the whole thing. It's like a radical, like yoga folks talk about, like radical acceptance, or meditators. Let fly in whatever flies in. Right. And it's a little bit like that.
And so I think there is an element of the sort of, there's an element of faith involved in it, the way you're describing it to me. It sounds like you have to be able to open the door to a pitch black room and believe there's a floor.
You do. And the cool part is after a while, your eyes start to adjust very slowly, and you start to be able to inch your way forward a little bit. And who knows, a car from the outside might drive by and give you a little view and then go away.
That's good.
Then,
that's good.
Certain things can aid in the way. Little hands come out and help. But
right. But that's the process to joy. Is basically a getting lost to find the destination.
I think so.
I hope everybody's following us.
Yeah, I hope so too.
There's a lot of like in through the outdoor stuff going on here.
That's exactly right. It's perfect way to put it.
Can we talk about recent work? I know you've got a lot of forthcoming projects, but I wanted to just touch on recent work because it's out there and people can listen to it online with the Joan of Arc performance and what you created. Can you give us an insight as to what you felt and thought when you started to see those first images that eventually inspired, drove your creation? Your entire build out of that, because it's not just the actual soundtrack of the film that you created, but it's the choice of instrumentation and the actual chordal structures you use. If we pull back the camera to 30,000 feet, what came over you to get you there?
I think just the images by themselves really,
they're very powerful.
They're so powerful. I mean, Renee Falconetti too is a monster. She's a genius. She is amazing. I don't know if I've ever seen acting like that. I don't think I have, that kind of submission.
Right.
So I think all of that was doing quite a bit of heavy lifting for me then to feel inspired enough to, be adventurous enough to want to collaborate. Right.
I have to imagine that you're looking at it and going, the music has to rise to this occasion, to this level.
Yeah.
But it has to, it's not just, this is not just background music.
Right.
That's the thing about it. It's not. it's not just filler or any of those other words you can think of.
Right.
To me, the soundtrack is its own entity that enhances and lives alongside the film.
I appreciate that. That's the intent. Yes, I wanted them to be two co-equal partners that in conjunction with one another would create the 1 + 1 = 3 moment. That's the intent, at least. That's what I'm trying for. I'm trying my best to meet their artistry, to meet Dreyer's artistry, to meet Renee Falconetti's artistry, so that they're separate, strong entities that will create a third.
And to give listeners a sort of a viewpoint of how you started to structure that, did it start in a particular place, meaning instrument-wise? Did you start at the piano? Did you start, with stringed instruments? I have no idea.
What's funny is the first thing that I started with is the first thing that the entire soundtrack starts with, which is a recording of cars crossing the Gil Hodges Memorial Bridge on the way to Jacob Riis Beach in New York. I spent hours one afternoon recording the cars crossing the bridge. Again, this sound, back to that. And that was the first initial kernel that I felt like was of use to, I hope Dreyer would feel the same way.
Right.
Or Joan of Arc. I felt like, for me, it evokes memory. And for me, it evokes spirits and things not long past. It invokes how things live in ways that we normally wouldn't be, necessarily possible, ghosts and things like that.
Right.
It brings up a choir of all of those kinds of things, which I think
that's such a great word to describe it, a choir.
I appreciate that because when you listen to the cars crossing that bridge, to me, it really does sound like a choir.
Wow.
Yeah, they're really. It's a remarkable kind of sound, especially on the bridge because it's a metal.
Right.
It's metal in the middle, so it can open. So
right.
The resonance is totally different. It really is like an instrument being played.
Except it's being played with thousands of cars.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of players.
Right. A lot of players, and they're all different shapes and sizes. So
right.
So each one is creating its own.
Right. Exactly.
Its own tone.
Exactly.
And so that was almost that was your doorway almost through ambience, right? It was like you're using this ambience that is, I'm going to use the word primal for you because it does stretch all the way back to your childhood.
It does. That's right.
And so it once again, here it is. It informs not only the work, but it informs the tip of the spear of the work.
That's exactly right. And if you listen throughout the soundtrack, it's in there. I bury it in there sometimes. It's outright. It reprises.
Right.
It's all over the place in there.
At what point does the musicality come in for you? Like where did that start to coalesce?
Well, to be honest, I feel like it's such a big part of the musicality, even though I'm not playing the bridge or
I understand. Yes.
It's not the playing, but yeah. The addition to that started to come in with some singers that I wanted to work with.
Okay.
A group of Sardinian singers, Tenores de Ataru, the singers from elsewhere, and they're apparently only Sardinian singers in outside of Sardinia that are doing this music. And I've been in love with that music for quite a long time. And I felt like it would be a perfect match for what was going on. I felt for Joan of Arc, so I wanted to work with them too, and that all worked out. So that was a key into some of the way of organizing music in a more traditional sense. Was working with them,
that was was it a true collaboration, or were you really driving the process completely for them?
No, it was a true collaboration. Actually, if anything, they were bringing traditional Sardinian songs and sort of trying them out. And I was picking the ones that I felt like were really relevant, and we were letting go of the ones that weren't. So they're really, really thousands of year old folk songs that they were trying out that I wanted to use for that. Now I embellish them. I integrate other instruments in there to shape a little bit. So that hopefully sound sits with picture a little bit more in parallel. But with them as singers, it's rooted really back in this old tradition. So yes, I gave sort of guidelines about what I was looking for, but I also gave them a lot of room to do what they do best.
There was a give and take. It wasn't just,
for sure,
you didn't just set the tone and say, this is what I want.
Right, for sure. Absolutely.
That's fascinating. I know that for me, some of the compositions that you've done, some of the soundtrack work that you've done, and I think I mentioned this to you once when we were talking, that I cannot separate it from the visual images, and I've tried like just muting it and watching the images and trying to think, well, could a 60s rock song have been used here for example, with the Vietnam documentary, and nothing would work as well as what you did, and a lot of the things that really hit home was your ability to use sort of an ambient approach and very much less is more.
Yes. Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm really glad that you felt that way. That's the intent. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, I mean, I really, if I can impress anything on the folks that listen to our talk today, is I invite them to check out those works. First of all, Ken Burns is phenomenal, and that is one of his really incredible achievements, to be able to capture what Vietnam was really about from the very beginning, all the way through. And your work in it, to me, is that it's that parallel piece that you cannot separate it from the visual images that you're watching. And it is a bit, even though you're not anywhere near stylistically to Duke Ellington, but it's a Duke Ellington kind of mentality of leaving things out, purposely leaving things out, right. Where somebody else would have already filled in with chords or notes. You're leaving all this space, and it creates all kinds of opportunities for tension and for reflection of what you're looking at, because the image is being supported by more of an atmosphere than a composition, if that makes any sense.
It does, yeah. I'm constantly trying to distill. Distill. What's the stuff that I can chuck? What's the stuff that I can keep?
Right.
And how I can get it to communicate simply.
It's like you have to find a way to filter through, and construct and deconstruct all at the same time.
I think that's right. And because as we all know, the more is not more most of the time. The more is actually quite less. Yeah.
That's right. Right.
Yeah. If I may border on a cliche.
Yeah. Except when it comes to cowbell.
Always more.
Always. More cowbell.
True.
I just want to switch gears a second, and
sure.
Just go back to you made a comment about listening to the Eagles, and because I think a lot of listeners are going to be like, wait a second, this is completely schizophrenic. What's going on here? This guy's talking about listening to Led Zeppelin, the Eagles, and all of a sudden we're in ambient land and atmospherics and Sardinian vocalists. So
where are we? Yeah.
Right. Where are we? There. But I think in our conversations, when we have talked about American blues and rock music, it has actually played an important role in your total musical upbringing.
Oh, it's a huge part of my person being, sense of music, sense of understanding the world.
You talk about, for example, the honesty of a song like Black Dog, right? Just the viscera of truth in your face.
Yeah.
From the playing to the singing and the composition itself, right?
Right.
So I guess maybe that all of that finds its way into your work, even if it's stylistically completely different.
Absolutely. I mean, because if you listen to a Muddy Waters record, it's life and death. It's not a joke.
Right.
You know,
It's not a joke.
it's the hard earned and won truth, and he's going to let us know what that is.
Yeah.
And there's so much music and freedom in the ability to say to someone exactly what you mean. And so I'm always trying to do that. When I say distill, I suppose that's what I mean.
And that distilling process is an ongoing process because you're always absorbing.
Always, yeah.
So when we talk about absorbing, I think about the artist is kind of like the great observer, right? Whether you're a composer or poet or painter, you're observing the outside world, and it's making its way into you,
Right.
and not just from the visual part that impresses on you, but it's making its way into your bones as well.
Yeah. Yes.
How has that been in this, to coin the phrase, in the age of COVID-19, right? In the age of the coronavirus, where you've had to quarantine, and it may be that you're happy being quarantined to a degree because it makes you focus on other things. But there's also, to me, there's the lack of that stimuli all of a sudden, right?
Right.
But have you even thought about it, I guess?
I have. And for me, it's been, while not being, not thoughtful about the amount of suffering that's going on for me, it's been great. And maybe for a lot of us, because, you're forced to get quiet, you're forced to look inward, and you're forced to confront, a confrontation with the self. And so much of, I don't know if it's fair, the country, the world is set up to allow you to not have to run into yourself. And now we've got to do it. And I think that's terrific. And I think that's tough. And I think that's filled with friction. But that friction can be very generative. And it has been for me, for sure. If we're talking about radical acceptance and I want to wake up and feel a certain way and get that into the piano, I'm able to deal with myself in a way that, talk about more honest, I'm able to reflect all sides of myself, the stuff that I want to celebrate and the stuff that I want to work on. And, it's a really great moment for quiet. And it's been very useful and wonderful for me. I mean, I've also thought about it in terms of the end of Hitchcock's The Birds, where I don't know how nature works, and many of us do not. We don't understand the logic, and we're fooling ourselves, of course. This isn't a unique thought if we think that we do. The birds don't attack at the end, and it's even scarier than if they did, because it just wasn't time, but we don't know when it was time ever. And it's really frightening.
You're right. That was clearly, a masterstroke by Hitchcock, where he leaves you with this foreboding tension of the unknown, right?
Exactly.
He doesn't give you the big gory ending.
Right.
That would be, that's clearly beneath him. He wants to keep twisting the knife, but not killing you,
That's right. And he wants to do it in and up here, and he's going to make you do it for yourself.
It makes me think of a line from the movie The Princess Bride: "To the death? No, to the pain." Doesn't want to kill you. He wants you to suffer.
Right. That's right. That's amazing.
Killing you would be like letting you off easy.
Right. That's right. That's exactly right.
Can we talk, before we wrap up, I want to talk about sort of forward thinking and where you're going. You've got an awful lot of forthcoming projects. Is there, the timetable other than general dates or whatever? I'm not sharing anything that's top secret. It's on your website.
Yeah.
You've got like some very interesting things that I could spend hours talking to you about. Project with Ken Burns on Ernest Hemingway, and God knows what that's going to be like. That's sounds like an amazing opportunity too.
It's been terrific.
How do you plan these out? I mean, have you started working on some of these, or are these still, just wondering how you manage it. That's all. Just kind of a general question. You don't have to give away any specific secrets or anything.
No, there's no secrets. Um, um, how I manage it is that I don't have 9 times out of 10, unless something gets in the way,
Mhm.
I don't have I just want to be with it and doing it. It's the kind of work that is, as you said earlier, it's so filled with more life making that I want to continue to do it. So the work, there is a lot going on, but to be honest, I feel like I could, we could even step it up even further. It's so, fun, to do it, to balance
Right.
it, to try to live the rocky life of this thing. It's terrific fun.
Oh wait, you
while
actually,
it's being
I just
serious.
realized you answered this question a while ago when you said you got to get lost,
Right.
right?
That's right.
So you just
So,
stay perpetually lost. That's how you get there. You stay perpetually lost until eventually you go, oh, this is where I was going.
and that's so funny. That probably makes no sense to anyone, but I'm glad it makes sense to you, and it's very true. And there's the poet Theodore Reck. He said something like, "Those that live with the vulnerabilities live with the mysteries," and I try to pry open the vulnerability as much as possible. That's a matter of getting lost too and letting yourself go. And the more that I can do that, the more I find I can manage.
Right.
I don't have my days too, but
Yeah.
the more that I can do that, I can. It seems to um, manage itself in some way. Just because I'm so deeply and crazily and insanely in love with the sound making and with the sounds, I'm a complete 100% unabashed sound junkie. And it
Right.
only gets larger. It
Right.
only gets bigger. That to call it work even isn't quite right, even though it is. I have to be a good shoemaker and work on my engineering,
Mm-hmm.
and then I also have to allow for these vulnerabilities and allow the two to work
Right.
together. And
Right. Right. Um, that's fascinating because it really speaks to the way you described it. I think is apt. It's not work. It's uh, actually, you made me think of somebody that is not at all related to you musically, but probably has a similar drive. Bruce Springsteen said they asked him why do you still do this? Why do you play 3 hours a night and like with all that energy and just you don't have anything to prove anymore. Why are you doing it? He says why do I do it? I have to do it.
yeah,
I do it
yeah,
because I have to, because it's a need, right?
right,
And I think that's kind of what you're describing is like this is a need. This is so organic to you. It's not, and this is the I guess one of the things I would want to communicate to listeners that this type of work is not at arm's length. It's it's very much completely internalized.
yes, yeah, yes. It's very close. It's
And that I think for some people can look at that and go, well, that doesn't seem to make sense because Ken Burns
uh-huh,
hired him to do this, right?
uh-huh,
But that's just that would not be telling the complete truth by
uh-huh.
thinking that way, that it's just a work for hire. It's not.
It's not.
It's
He
yes,
he.
yes, you have to make your way through the physical world. I understand. And you need to do work and be paid for it and all those things. But the work itself is not at arm's length. You're completely immersed.
That's right. And the beautiful thing, many beautiful things about Ken that I could say, and Eric and Chris and all of the colleagues that I work with there, they, in a way, not wholly, but mostly hire me to do this thing, to get lost, to go into the dark, to walk
Mhm.
around bumping into buildings, and
Right,
to be myself. And
right.
their magnanimity and generosity in sitting with music that they don't necessarily resonate with first right away and try and sometimes then do is so I admire that so much about them.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you just brought up. You're when you first present, right? Um, so I know by listening to your stuff, some of it is extremely dense in terms of being able to put your arms around it at a first listen.
Right, right.
However, for me, the magic happens when I see it with the images. It makes complete and total sense to me.
That's great. That's kind of some of my objective. I mean, Joyce talked about static art and a more fluent kind of art, or what did you call it? It's static and kinetic, I think, where an artist might be trying to move an audience all the same way at one time, where 300 people are all crying at once. And other artists are trying to put stuff in the way that their listeners are going to have to deal with. And I feel like I like both. I'm not of either ideological camp, but I do like to put things in the way. I do like to confront. I do like to not give as much as a listener probably wants, and to even withhold. That's
a good way to describe it. You do that, but you do it in a way that the best way I can describe it is your compositional work is outrageously empathic to the visuals that are tied to it.
Thanks.
I think I'm going to coin that phrase, outrageously empathic.
Good.
David Cieri, outrageously empathic.
I try. Yes, I absolutely. We're talking about Eleanor Roosevelt. I mean, the humanity is there is right. Something that I also want to augment. I want to reflect. Talk about admiration. I want that to be in the music. Sometimes I worry. I'm watching like a Fassbinder movie, and I wonder how much this guy loves humanity. But so my music isn't like that either. I'm not putting stuff in the way to create problems. It might be so that in the dealing, we perhaps, if we're strong enough, myself included as a listener, to deal with it, we might arrive at a place we didn't expect because we had the fortitude to kind of bump up against the thing that was being offered.
That's a really, that gives me some insight that I didn't previously have. That's a great way to describe it. When you look at the road ahead as a composer, as an artist, you've got a lot of projects in the pipeline.
Yeah,
that you're working on
at the moment. Yeah,
at the moment. Are there certain things that you'd like to do more of? For example, live performance. And I know you've done quite a bit of that, but is that something that you would like to do more in the future once we're in at least a new normal where that can be allowed, right?
So much the live performance, because something happens in the live scenario, as you know, being a live musician in your life, there's something that happens in the live scenario that is just, you can't replicate it, and it goes away right afterward. It's right. So elusive, and it'll never be the same again. And there's something about that impermanence that I love. Right. So yes, I want to do that with the scoring more and more, like the Joan of Arc project. That's something I want to get back into, because for years since I've been in New York, it's been, I've been a termite working in the dark, right, alone, and then I have a session once a year, and we get together with the musicians. It's great, but the community around, playing live is something I truly want to do more, and something I miss. I actually have a project now I'm starting. It's a naive and childish kind of dream. It's like a world carillon project where I'm trying to get as many carillon bells in the world. Sounds
no, and by the way, let's just take a second and describe what carillons are for those that may not be familiar.
Oh, they're this monstrous instrument that reside in the towers of many churches, and they have a player up there playing this thing that's very similar to a piano, but they play with their fists.
Yeah. It's wild.
And it's moving these 40,000-ton bells back and forth, and there's hundreds of bells sometimes in the towers. So I think it. Well, other than the Earth itself, probably Tesla would say the Earth is the largest instrument, but
right.
It's one of the largest formal instruments anyway. And I made one record, with the carillon, 40 minutes, and that's another thing I want to continue with this project. That I'm trying to put together at the moment too. So we need more moments at the moment, to remind us that, there are things that are unifying.
Yeah, that's That's
And
needed
maybe
now more than ever,
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. I do. And the computer and Zoom is unifying, but if we could get a non-digital analog way of doing it,
Yeah.
we're working
Well,
on it.
we all, I guess, hope and pray that we get to that place with a vaccine, and that we can get some version of normalcy back at some point. Because I think you're right. I think music is one of those incredible human-made things that can bring all of us together, even if it's like you said, even if it's for just a little while.
Right.
Because the concert experience is, by nature, it is impermanent, right? It's a moment in time,
Right.
but it has that power to bring people together and to create energy and emotion, and in that one fell swoop of everyone. Think about the word, we're in concert, right?
Right. Exactly.
The audience is in concert with you.
That's right. Exactly.
So yeah, that's on so
It's a
many levels.
sacrament.
Yeah, it's a sacrament on so many levels. It's missed right now.
Right.
It would be so helpful to have that right now. Let me take it a step further.
Yeah.
It'd be so helpful. So David, thank you so much for spending some time with me and giving me this honor to be able to pester you with questions and pick your brain.
It's quite the opposite. Thank you so much for asking, and it's been great to talk to you.
It's really been a pleasure. And thanks to the TEDx folks for giving us this opportunity as well.
Yes, TEDx, thank you.
Thank you, guys.